This lecture is related to the Asian Treasures from the Billings Collection exhibition, which if you haven't seen it yet, we do encourage you to come and take a look. It's in the McCausland Gallery upstairs on the second floor. But our speaker tonight, Tita, was the guest curator for this exhibition. She holds degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Michigan. She worked in the Painting and Calligraphy Department at the National Palace Museum in Taipei, and then she has taught the history of Asian art at a whole variety of institutions, including the University of Missouri, Kansas City, Rhodes College in Memphis, the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Trinity University, San Antonio, Yale, and at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. She was Curator of Asian Art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, and was Consulting Curator at the Art Complex Museum in Duxbury, Massachusetts. She has organized numerous exhibitions in addition to the one that we're featuring, and has also authored quite a number of articles and catalogs, and she lectures extensively. Please join me in welcoming Tita this evening.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's really wonderful to be here. The exhibition looks fantastic. And I want to thank Michael, who was the coordinating curator for the exhibition, who got the NHA team all on the same path. And we succeeded in creating a stunning exhibition. I also want to thank Melinda Sullivan, who serves on the board of the NHA, because at a trustee meeting, there was a question that came up: who should we invite to serve as the guest curator for the Billings exhibition? And Melinda suggested me, so thank you so much. Also, of course, I want to thank David and Beverly Billings, who have been an absolute pleasure to work with for now several years. Their enthusiasm, dedication, scholarship have just been astonishing, and I could not have done the work of the curator without their assistance, and especially the book which they wrote, which is available for sale, Passion and Pursuit. And I want to thank my husband, Douglas, because he has served as chief support services for the last over a couple of years here. So let us begin the stories from the Billings Collection. Billings Collection, what can these objects tell us? Well, first of all, I need to get this to work here. Okay. I hope you all were effectively greeted by the seated figure of the water moon Guan Yin, who is in the lobby. And Guan Yin is a very, very important Buddhist deity. A bodhisattva is a being who has the option of entering nirvana, passing on from this life into the next, as the historical Buddha did. But bodhisattvas stay on this earth to help other Buddhists realize their own enlightenment, which is the goal of all devout Buddhists. So it's a very, very important role played by Guan Yin, who is the bodhisattva of infinite compassion and mercy. This was carved around 1600 out of wood. Originally it was brightly painted, seated on a rocky throne, which is why the name is the water moon Guan Yin, seated in what they call the royal ease pose. So we have one leg across and one leg pendant. We have one hand in the do not fear gesture and the other in the giving gesture. This sculpture was brought to Nantucket on a ship, and the captain of the ship, when he died, passed it on to his children, who then ultimately sold it on Nantucket, and it was purchased happily by David and Beverly. So this sculpture would have been placed in a Buddhist temple. So this is a typical Buddhist temple in China with an incense burner in front, the large, impressive hall, the tile roof, the bracketing system, And inside, the worshipers would go inside and pay their respects to the various images, and they would chant sutras and perform their religious devotion. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what sort of setting the Bodhisattva would have been in initially. So the exhibition is divided up into 5 sections. So I'm just going to show highlights from the different sections. And of course, I'm influenced by the sort of things that I particularly like. This lecture, I could do this many, many times. And so bear with me while we begin with this tiger pillow. So the Chinese sleep on ceramic pillows, which obviously are very different from what we sleep on. But the idea is you support the neck, and then the head sort of goes off the pillow. And they come in different shapes and materials. This one is particularly delightful because this is the year of the tiger. And in China, there are 12 zodiac animals, one for each year. And if you were born in the year of the tiger, you would have the following traits. You could be unpredictable, charming, fearless, or rebellious. And also, it is believed that sleeping on a pillow like this would protect against evil, and also it would help women give birth to sons. Now, in China, of course, giving birth to a son is much more important than having a daughter. But this is made out of stoneware, and it's very dynamically painted with slip in the black or the very, very dark brown design of flowers on the top, and then, of course, the tiger body underneath. So stoneware is a ceramic type that is fired about 1,000 degrees centigrade. It's not porcelain. It is impervious to liquid. It was made in China for many, many centuries, and in this particular example, the design is achieved by painting. So when you look at ceramics, you always want to analyze what is the material, what is the decorative technique, and of course, what was the function. So the collecting section really features a lot of ceramics, and one of the great strengths of the Billings Collection is their ceramic collection. This is an example of a porcelain ewer and warming bowl, and it is made, as I said, out of porcelain, which must contain several important ingredients. It must contain kaolin, which is white china clay, and also patunsa, which gives elasticity, so you can stretch the body and make it into different forms. Stretch it thin. Ultimately, porcelain is translucent. It also rings when you strike it. This type of basin or warming bowl, because of its lobed shape, was very difficult to achieve, and it is in the form of a lotus. So as you go through the exhibition, there are certain motifs that are repeated over and over again, and one of them is the lotus, which is a very auspicious plant. It blooms, it comes out of muddy water and blooms with no dirt on it. So it's a symbol of purity, especially in a Buddhist context. So this was created, the ewer would have been for holding wine. The warming bowl, of course, keeps the wine warm. The finial is topped with a very lively lion, and it is decorated with an incised design. And the glaze is a very, very pale blue-green Qingbai glaze, which was formulated in the 11th century and was used for several centuries after that. The second section we call Articles of Life. Of course, one of the most important aspects of life is money. And the money you see here, this is a paper 1 kwan bank note. So the unit of measurement is a kwan. This was actually issued, there's a lot of calligraphy on this. This was issued in 1375, so it's extremely early, during the reign of the first Ming Dynasty emperor, printed on mulberry bark paper. It is believed to be the largest paper bill ever produced, and one of the oldest examples of paper money in the world. Now, if you're wondering what some of the calligraphy says on it, part of it is an admonition that if you try and counterfeit this, you will be decapitated. Now, if you inform the imperial government about the person who has counterfeited it, you will be handsomely rewarded. So there are all kinds of information on this Quan bank note. And it is displayed with a number of other items of money upstairs. In Chinese culture, Confucius was an extremely important person, and he wrote the Confucian Analects. And as an educated person in China, you were expected to understand the Analects and to learn how to write calligraphy in a beautiful fashion. So there's an area which has the objects that would have been found on a scholar's desk. And there are quite a few items on that desk, so I invite you to go and look at them. But one of the most important things that you need to have is water to grind your ink on the inkstone. So this is a water pot that was made out of porcelain during the reign of the Emperor Kangxi, late 17th, early 18th century, and it has a porcelain body and a peach bloom glaze. So the peach bloom glaze was extremely difficult to achieve. It was made with copper oxide, and it had to be fired in a reduction kiln so that you eliminate the oxygen at a certain point in the firing cycle, and that turns the glaze this beautiful shade of darker red at the top, and then it mottles down to green and then a little blush of pink, so it looks like the skin of a peach. So water pot, and then you use the water to grind the ink, and ink is made out of pine soot and glue, and you have to grind the ink with water on an ink stone, which I will show you in just a moment. But this is two examples of ink sticks. One is in the shape of a bamboo pod, bamboo shoot, and on the left, a globe. So having an ink stick in the form of a bamboo stalk with its pod is quite unusual and really very, very informative, because the Chinese scholars were believed to be very upright and would bend in the wind when they were ruled by foreigners, especially during the Yuan dynasty, but they would not break. And so the bamboo became symbolic of the upright scholar and was often painted as a theme in the scholar amateur painting tradition. So you would take your ink stick, put a little water on the ink stone, and grind it to turn the solid into the liquid ink. And then you have a brush. This is a brush stand with a series of different brushes, and then in front of it, the ink stone. And both of these are decorated with dragons. So if you go through the exhibition, you want to notice how many dragons there are. And the dragon is considered the king of the scaly beasts. He was associated with the emperor, and he would go to sleep throughout the winter, and then the emperor would perform ceremonies in the spring to wake up the dragon, who would bring the spring rain, who would then, the rains would produce a very abundant crop of rice or wheat, depending on where you are in China. So we have dragon up here, another dragon here, dragons down here, and then the ink stone is carved with several auspicious dragons. So the tradition of a scholar, you would study Confucian classics, you would learn how to write calligraphy, and then you would take the civil service examinations. You would take them locally, and then you would progress up through the different levels, and the final exam would take place, if you had made it up through these different levels, in Beijing, in the Imperial Palace, at which point, hopefully, you would be given a very, very significant appointment. The Billings have a rich collection of textiles, so it was very, very difficult for me to pick a textile to talk about tonight. But I chose this lady's vest, which is a quasi-official vest. There were all kinds of levels of importance within the Imperial Court. So this is not an official vest, just a semi-official vest, and it is decorated with a Mandarin square in the center that has a flying crane. So at the court, you would wear a square that indicated your rank. This is the first rank of a civil official. Since this was a garment for a woman, she was not entitled to any rank at all, naturally. But it would have been the rank of her father or her husband. So in addition to the Mandarin square, there are a number of motifs. So we have the dragon here, we have waves, we have birds, there are bats and fish and all kinds of auspicious themes. This is embroidered silk, and we have to remember that silk was invented in China thousands of years ago and continues to be a very, very important product. The embroidery on this, some of it is just a regular type of embroidery stitch, but a number of the decorative motifs are executed using the forbidden stitch. So in the exhibition, there are several examples of textiles that have the forbidden stitch. And this was a very, very painstaking, fine technique where you wrap the silk floss around the needle and then you poke the needle down and it creates a kind of knot effect. It's called forbidden because it was forbidden to be worn by anyone except the very wealthy elite, and also because it was created for people who lived within the forbidden city. So if we turn our attention to burial objects, the Chinese believe that everybody has two souls. One soul, when you die, goes up to a heavenly realm, and the other soul remains in the tomb, and it needs to be placated, kept happy, provided with the kinds of things that they would have had during their lifetime. So this is a view of the central room in the tomb of the Prince Liu Sheng, who died in 113 BCE, and this tomb was excavated or found in 1968. So imagine that this is like a banqueting room, and there are bronze vessels for a banquet, especially wine vessels and incense burners and all matter of paraphernalia. But the most exciting thing in this tomb was the fact that the prince was buried in a life-size jade burial suit. And before 1968, people had seen these little jade tiles, but nobody knew what they were for. So finally, when Liu Sheng's tomb was opened, they did realize what they were used for. So upstairs, there is a jade burial suit, and it is composed of jade, small jade tiles, mostly rectangular, 2,798 jade tiles. Each tile has a little hole in the corner, and they're sewn together with gold thread or gold wire. So when you look at this, ask yourself, who sewed this together? So the answer is David Billings sewed this together. This is one of his COVID projects. And it's quite remarkable because the suit was not, it was sort of semi-intact, but he figured it all out. It has 12 sections: the face, the head, the torso, the front, the back, the arms, the gloves, the leggings, and the feet. And you have to remember that in order to work jade, it's one of the hardest stones in the universe, and you have to you can't carve it with a knife. You have to work it with an abrasion of sand held in a liquid substance. So it's extremely labor intensive. And this particular jade bodysuit has on the chest here a pair of phoenix birds facing one another, which tells us that this was created for a very, very high-ranking female. So why did they bury people in jade bodysuits? They believed that the jade would prevent decomposition of the body. Sadly, that did not work. But it also was meant to ward off evil spirits. So we just hope that the evil spirits stayed away from the body when it was protected by the jade bodysuit. There are a number of ceramic burial items in the exhibition, and they tell us a lot about Chinese culture that we would have absolutely no idea about it otherwise. So this is a model of a house. It's made out of earthenware, and it has a green glaze on it that the green comes from copper oxide. And it tells us that Chinese architecture was multi-storied, and they used tile for the roof. So remember I showed you the Buddhist temple with the tile roofing. So this is the tile, ceramic tile roofing, very, very heavy. So it had to be supported by brackets underneath. So we have a multi-story structure. It has figures. It has a courtyard out front, and very, very important, large scale, finely worked, and tells us about the details of Chinese architecture, especially during the Han Dynasty. This is from about 100 AD. If you were in your tomb, you might want to have a storyteller to entertain you. So this is a figure of a storyteller created out of earthenware. It's quite unusual. China is a very formal culture, basically, especially because of the influence of Confucianism. You were supposed to behave properly at all times. You were not supposed to have your pants falling down, for example. You were not supposed to crouch down the way this figure is, crouching down. If we had the back view, you could see his pants are kind of falling down. And there's a big storyteller at the entrance, which also is quite lively. So he has his mouth and this very lovely smile. The eyes are kind of crinkled. His forehead is furrowed because he's laughing. He holds a drum in one hand and would have held an implement to beat the drum. So he is in the tomb singing, very animated, the pose of an entertainer. And this particular type of figure was only made in Sichuan province, which is towards the west of China. There also is an impressive pair of Lokapala figures. So Lokapalas are guardian figures, and they actually began to be used in a Buddhist context, but then they were adopted for use in burial. So they wear armor. They were created probably in the middle of the 8th century. So you can see the pose is very lively, one leg bent, the other leg straight, giving a good S curve, so they have the convincing sense of movement. They are subduing animals, and one has his mouth open and the other has his mouth closed. So that's a typical combination for Lokapala figures. They were made out of earthenware and painted with polychrome. There's quite a lot of polychrome on these two that still remains, and also the nice gilding, which adds a certain glamorous touch. Another aspect of visiting the exhibition is that you can really trace and link different sections one to another. So it's not, I mean, it is divided into 5 sections, but there always is a connection between one section and another. So when we look at Buddhism, for example, a particular area in the Buddhist section focuses on Tibetan Buddhism. Now, when you study, there's a good reason why I never really got deeply immersed in Buddhist studies. It's just too complicated, no doubt about it, but it's interesting. So if you look at Buddhism in Tibet, It's quite different from Buddhism in India or China or Japan. And so some of the distinctive features are the particular characters that are portrayed in Tibet. So this is a gilt bronze sculpture that portrays a particular Lama, the Lama Milarepa. And he lived in the late 11th and early 12th centuries. We actually know his birth date and his death date. He wandered through Tibet. According to legend, he wrote 100,000 songs. He performed miracles, and he converted people to Buddhism. So he is seated on a gazelle skin, and he has his hand up to his ear as though he is listening. He holds a begging bowl, and he's dressed in a cotton monk's robe. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they spend a lot of time practicing yoga. So he is a yogic practitioner who composed these songs and traveled around singing the songs and performing miracles. You don't find cups made out of actual skulls in many different Buddhist contexts. So this is a skull cup. They took the skull of a very important Buddhist monk and then decorated it by inlaying it with silver in a design of a Vajra, which is a thunderbolt. So here is the thunderbolt, and then it's on a three-legged stand decorated with skulls and Vajras. So the Vajra as a thunderbolt is important in Tibetan Buddhism, and it's used to transform delusion into perfect wisdom. So that is a Buddhist goal everywhere, but in particular, they use different items. So this skull cup would have been used in a ritual to make offerings to the fierce deities, to subdue the deities, which conceptually it's these fierce deities are in the mind of the worshiper. In Japan, they don't have that type of Buddhism in particular. There are various Buddhist sects in Japan. One of the most popular ones is the worship of the Buddha of the Western Paradise, Amida. So this is a household shrine that focuses on a standing Buddha here, the Buddha Amida. So if you are an Amida worshiper, all you need to do is once in your life say, "Hail Amida Buddha," and you will be reborn in his Western paradise, which is a glorious place with dancing girls and feasts and lively music, and it's a glorious, glorious setting. So this particular shrine, you have to imagine it's like a miniature version of a Buddhist temple. So it has a lot of different components. It has the standing Buddha in the center, has a painting behind him. It has lotus flowers growing out of they're not growing. They're lotus flowers in a vase, and then a complete garniture set here, which has 2 vases, 2 candlesticks, and an incense burner. So the books below here, these books are what you would take as a devout Buddhist. If you went around Japan and visited different temples, you would take that book with you. It's like a journal, and then the book would be stamped with the stamp of the temple. So in China, the emperor, especially at different times, different emperors were devout patrons of Buddhism. And the second Ming emperor built this porcelain tower outside of Nanjing. So the capital was Nanjing in the early 15th century. And this was built as an act of gratitude to honor his parents. So that's a very Confucian idea, to do something to honor your ancestors. but it's also a devout Buddhist idea. And this, at the time, it was an octagonal pagoda that had 9 stories, and it was 261 feet tall. It was the tallest building constructed. When it was constructed, it was one of the tallest buildings at the time, very complicated, and it was faced with white porcelain bricks. So white is the color of mourning in China. So if you go to a funeral, you wear white. If you go to a wedding, you do not wear white, you wear red. And the white porcelain bricks, we know, were made at the imperial kilns in South China at Jingdezhan. So the porcelain construction was extraordinary. It was destroyed in 1856 during the Taipei Rebellion, and just a few bricks survive. So in the exhibition, there are 2 bricks that originally came from this porcelain tower that were picked up by a man named Mr. Smith when he happened to be in the area and brought back. There are only a handful of these bricks still in existence anywhere in the world. So it's extraordinary that we have them, and wonderful to have the painting of what the porcelain pagoda looked like when it was first constructed. So that ties together not only Buddhism, but imperial patronage. So we're moving on to the final section of the exhibition, which is the Imperial Court. It has various examples of textiles, and in particular, one of my favorites is this pair of finials. So these finials are made out of gilt metal, and they are inlaid with kingfisher feathers, which were glued down. And when you look at the decorative, well, let me just go forward a minute. So these finials were in the summer palace in one of the throne rooms. So this is not the throne room in the in the summer palace, but it gives you the idea of the throne room has a throne, obviously, and behind the throne is a screen, and on top of the screen were finials. So these dragon finials were originally located in a position like those finials. And the design of these finials, remember the dragon is associated with the emperor. So we have the overall design is a dragon with an open mouth. You can kind of see the open mouth here and the eyes. And then there are other dragons here. And then there are bats, the bats up here. So you have a combination of dragons and bats. The word for bat in Chinese is fu, which is the same sound as the word for happiness. So the Chinese love these word plays. So the bat is a very, very auspicious creature in Chinese culture. So making these inlaid kingfisher feather items was extraordinarily expensive because the kingfisher bird was a very rare bird, and it was a painstaking technique to install the kingfisher feathers on these gilt metal finials. Unfortunately, the summer palace was completely destroyed in the Second Opium War of 1860, so there was a lot of looting that occurred. So these came out during the destruction of the summer palace. And if you're wondering what a kingfisher bird looks like, they are quite small, and the wings have these iridescent feathers. So when you look at the finials upstairs, most people look at them and they think, oh, that's enamel. Well, it's not enamel. It is the inlaid kingfisher bird feather. So the last item I'm going to show is the diorama of the Peking Opera, which is quite an extravaganza. The opera itself, Peking Opera, it originated in South China in Anhui province. And the Qianlong emperor traveled to that province and saw performances of opera. and decided that that was just exactly what he needed. So he brought opera troupes from Anhui to Beijing in 1790 for his 80th birthday. So if anybody's thinking of celebrating an 80th birthday, you can just imagine how the Qianlong Emperor celebrated his by bringing the opera troupes up to perform in Beijing. So it is a performance art. It involves singing, reciting, acting, acrobats, martial arts, and it focuses on two different types of stories. The stories can either be civil stories, which are referred to as wen, and those involve love and marriage. And the other type of stories are the wu, which are the military or war stories. They are performed in the theater, in the theater. The Empress Dowager Cixi, who was an extremely important patron of the arts, she was an enthusiastic patron. She had 2 stages in the Summer Palace and also one in her private quarters in the Forbidden City, and she invited the most gifted artists to perform. And a diorama like this could possibly have been owned by her. So when you wonder what are the most famous Chinese operas that are still performed today, one of them is the Drunken Concubine, Yang. And here, this is the Drunken Concubine scene. Here's the Drunken Concubine. She had been invited to wait for the arrival of the emperor in the 100-flower pavilion. But the emperor was dallying with one of his other concubines and was so late that she was waiting and waiting, and she kept drinking and drinking. And by the time he got there, she was completely intoxicated, and he just dismissed her, as the emperor was prone to do. So that was not a good idea. But this has many, many different figures, and it's made out of cut bamboo covered with gesso and polychrome, multiple colors. And this is another one of David's restoration projects. So it was in very poor condition. It is now in perfect condition and beautifully preserved. And I wanted you to see up close what a Peking opera performer looked like so you can see the makeup on the face. It's really, really quite extraordinary and needless to say, extremely dramatic. So there's a lot to be seen upstairs: drama, burial, jade, textiles. Really, there's something for everybody. So enjoy the exhibition, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tita. Really appreciated that. I did want to note, all of these artifacts are much more stunning, obviously, in real life. Our projector does not do them justice, so I do invite you to go up and take a look at the kingfisher feathers. The opera in particular, the polychrome on that is quite stunning, and lots of little details. So please do take a look at the exhibition if you haven't seen them already. We do have time for questions, so if there are any questions, hold your hands up and we'll do that.
Well, I was babysitting for my cousin's child in Washington, and went to have lunch with his parents' close friends who lived next door to the director of the Freer Gallery. And so they said, what are you really passionate about? Well, a couple of years before that, we had traveled back to Asia. I lived in Taiwan when I was 7 with my parents. My father was stationed there in the Navy, and my parents had always wanted to go back. So we went back in the 60s, and I just became absolutely captivated with Chinese art and took courses at the University of Pennsylvania from some inspiring professors, and then ended up going over to the Freer Gallery at the invitation of the director and meeting the professors from the University of Michigan who had a close relationship with the Freer Gallery because Charles Lang Freer had been born and brought up in Michigan and supported the gallery, obviously in a big way, and the University of Michigan. So that's really how it all happened. So it's been a great adventure, especially with the Billings recently, the recent chapter, most recent chapter. So,
yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all very much for coming tonight. If we could have another round of applause for Tita, I think it's well deserved.